There is a photograph on my desk, the one my grandmother took the morning I defended my thesis. In it, I am standing in front of the university gates in my pressed white button-down, hair still a little wild despite my best efforts to tame it, and I am laughing at something my mother said just before the shutter clicked. My father is to my left, hand on my shoulder, eyes bright with the particular kind of pride that only parents know how to carry. And my grandmother, Halmoni, is on my right, her small wrinkled hand wrapped around mine, her smile the kind that folds an entire lifetime of love into a single expression. I keep it because it reminds me of who I am when everything else tries to tell me otherwise. My name is Daniel Kim. I am 28 years old, an Omega, a lecturer in the Department of Literature and Communication Studies at the same university from which I graduated top of my class, and I have spent my whole life being told, in 1,000 quiet and not so quiet ways, that those two things should not be able to coexist. That an Omega cannot sit at the front of a classroom and hold the room. That soft features and pink lips and the particular biological designation I was born with mean something lesser. Something smaller. My grandmother was the first person who ever truly disabused me of that idea. Daniel, she used to say, pressing both her cool palms against my cheeks when I was a boy, love is not charity. It is not something a person gives because they pity you or because they have excess. Love is a transaction of equals. And if anyone ever makes you feel that you owe your love more than they owe you theirs, you stand up, you straighten your spine, and you walk away. I was maybe 7 years old the first time she said that to me. I did not fully understand it, but I stored it somewhere deep, the way children store the things that matter most, in the bones rather than the mind. My parents were different from the parents of other Omegas I knew growing up. Most families with Omega children, especially Omega sons, either overprotected them until they became fragile, or quietly taught them to make themselves smaller so the world would be more comfortable around them. My parents did neither. My father, a retired civil engineer with a booming laugh and the gentlest eyes I have ever seen, taught me to read blueprints at age 6 and argued with my secondary school homeroom teacher when she suggested I should perhaps consider a vocational path, better suited to Omegas. My mother, a retired high school art teacher with paint permanently embedded in the lines of her palms, taught me that beauty is not weakness, that softness and strength can live in the same body, in the same heart. They taught me to love fully, openly, without apology. But they also taught me, and this is the part most people missed, to love myself first. Not in a selfish way. In the way of someone who understands their own worth so clearly that they do not require others to confirm it for them. I carried all of this into my adult life like a set of quiet superpowers. My apartment is small but mine, a second-floor unit near campus with bookshelves along every available wall, a kitchen that smells perpetually of the roasted barley tea I brew every morning, and a window seat wide enough to curl up in with a manuscript and a blanket. I have a routine I love. I wake early, brew my tea, grade papers or prepare lectures, run along the river path before breakfast, and arrive at my classroom with 15 minutes to spare. My students, most of them alphas and betas with the occasional omega, learned quickly that my classroom was not a place where designations mattered. What mattered was the quality of your thinking and the honesty of your voice. I was content. More than content. I was happy. And then I met Cheol Min. It was a Tuesday in early autumn when the Professional Development Conference came to our campus, a 2-day event on interdisciplinary education, bringing together academics, corporate professionals, and a handful of guest speakers from industries adjacent to our fields. I almost did not go. I had a stack of papers to return and a meeting with a graduate student about her dissertation proposal, and frankly, I found most conferences to be long exercises in listening to people say important-sounding things that could have been summarized in a single well-written paragraph. But my department head had essentially made attendance mandatory, so I went. I was standing near the coffee station between sessions, flipping through the conference program with one hand and holding a cup of black coffee with the other, when I became aware of someone standing too close behind me in the queue. Not aggressively close. Just closer than the usual comfortable distance strangers maintain. And then a voice, low and unhurried, said, "Is that coffee or is that an act of optimism?" I turned. He was tall, significantly taller than me, which at my height was not especially difficult, but his presence was the kind that made the space around him feel actively smaller. 6 feet at least. A jaw that looked like it had been carved by someone with very particular opinions about geometry. Dark hair swept back from a high forehead. Eyes the color of deep water on an overcast day, dark brown with something unreadable moving in them. He was wearing a charcoal blazer over a white shirt with the top button casually undone, and he was looking at me with the specific expression of a man who has just said something and is genuinely curious whether it will land. "It's both," I said. "The coffee is terrible, which requires optimism to drink." He smiled then, and it was not the smile of a man performing charm. It was the smile of someone who was actually unexpectedly delighted. A small dimple appeared on his left cheek. "Honest," he said. "I like that. I'm Cheol-min Park Cheol-min." I knew the name. Most people in any remotely professional circle in this city knew the name. Park Cheol-min, CEO of Minhwa Group, one of the most successful mid-scale conglomerates in the country. He was 35. He had been married 6 times. That last part was the thing that practically every person I knew cited first when his name came up, usually with a raised eyebrow and a particular tone. I did not raise my eyebrow. I took a sip of my terrible optimistic coffee and said, "Daniel Kim, Literature and Communication." Hello guys, welcome to Mimiel. Before we dive into this story, note this is an original work of Mimiel. If seen in another channel that is not Mimiel, please report that channel for impersonation and copyrights. Please don't forget to subscribe, comment, share and like for more stories like this. Now let's continue. "A lecturer?" he asked. "A lecturer," I confirmed. He tilted his head slightly. There was something in the way he looked at me, not the way alphas sometimes look at omegas, that assessing, measuring glance that makes you feel simultaneously seen and reduced. He looked at me the way you look at a sentence that surprises you. Like he was reading something he had not expected to find. "Would it be strange," he said, "if I told you this is the most interesting conversation I've had all day, and it's been approximately 45 seconds? "It's a low bar," I said. "You've been at a conference." He laughed, actually laughed, ducking his chin slightly, and I felt something shift in the air between us. Something small and significant that I catalogued without fully examining, the way you sometimes sense a change in weather before you can name it. We spent the entire next session side by side in the second row, passing notes in the margins of our programs like two students who had decided that paying attention was optional. By the time the second day ended and the conference dissolved into farewell handshakes and exchanged business cards, I had his number in my phone and a standing coffee arrangement for the following Friday. I walked home that evening in the early autumn air, the trees along the avenue just beginning to suggest gold at their edges, and I thought, well, that was unexpected. I was smiling the entire way home and I could not entirely explain why. The next 3 months moved the way certain things move, slowly when you are inside them, and then looking back with a terrifying speed that makes you wonder how you arrived somewhere so fully without noticing the journey. We had coffee that Friday. And the Friday after that. Then dinner. Then a Sunday walk along the river where we talked for 3 hours about literature and corporate philosophy and the way cities change their character after midnight, and at some point we had stopped walking and were sitting on a bench watching the water, and I realized I had forgotten entirely that I had planned to be home 2 hours ago. I learned things about him in those weeks. Not the things that were written about him in business columns and lifestyle magazines, not the net worth figures or the acquisition timelines or the marriages, though we did eventually carefully talk about those too. I learned the things that exist beneath the public surface of a person. That he read voraciously, not business strategy or self-help, but novels. That he had a soft spot for animals and had once, entirely unprompted, pulled over on a highway to move a tortoise off the road. That he cooked, genuinely cooked, not the performative cooking of wealthy men who own expensive equipment and rarely use it, and that he found it meditative. That he had a humor that was quiet and dry and appeared at the most unexpected moments, and that when something genuinely struck him as funny, his whole face changed. I also learned that he carried something heavy. It was not always visible. But there were moments, particularly when he was tired, or when the conversation brushed against the subject of his personal life, when I could see it. A weight behind the eyes. A brief contraction around his jaw as if he were bracing. "Do you want to talk about them?" I asked one evening over dinner about 6 weeks in. I did not specify who them meant. I did not need to. He set down his chopsticks. Looked at the table for a moment. Then at me. "I've been told I have very poor judgment," he said quietly. "About people. About who to trust." "Who told you that?" "Several people," he said. After it ended each time." He paused. "I used to wonder if it was true. If there was something fundamentally broken in my ability to see people clearly. And now?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. "Now I think," he said slowly, "that perhaps the problem was never my sight. Perhaps it was the interference." I did not ask what he meant by interference that night, but I filed it away, because I had been doing my own research. I want to be clear, I did not go looking out of suspicion. I went looking out of care. I had begun to understand that this man in front of me, this large, quietly tender, fiercely intelligent man who had dismantled every assumption I had brought to our first conversation, was someone I was in genuine danger of loving, and I did not love carelessly. I never had. So I did what I had always done when something mattered. I paid attention. I listened carefully. I asked the right questions in the right order. And slowly, across careful conversations with people who were willing to speak, mutual acquaintances, publicly available records, and eventually, after months had passed, the ex-husbands themselves, a picture began to form. A picture that had nothing to do with Cheol Min's judgment at all. We had been officially together for 2 months when it rained. I know that sounds like an unremarkable thing to say. It rains regularly. But there are rains that are merely weather, and then there are rains that are something else, that arrive at a moment so precisely calibrated to the emotional temperature of your life that they feel almost authored. This was the second kind. It was a Thursday. I had had an exhausting week, 3 lectures, 2 committee meetings, a set of 40 undergraduate essays that ranged from genuinely brilliant to staggeringly painful, and a graduate seminar that had run 2 hours over because my students had, uncharacteristically, decided to care deeply about the assigned text and refused to leave. By the time I arrived at my apartment, I had nothing left. I was the kind of tired that sits behind your eyes. I had just changed into a soft shirt and loose trousers and was standing in my kitchen debating whether I had the energy to make actual food or whether I would simply eat tea and pretend it was a meal, when my intercom buzzed. "It's me," said Cheol Min's voice through the small speaker. He sounded tired too. I know I should have called. I needed somewhere quiet. I buzzed him up without hesitation. He appeared at my door still in his work clothes, the jacket gone, the sleeves of his shirt rolled to the elbows, his hair slightly less composed than usual. He was holding 2 containers of takeout from the place near his office that made the soft tofu stew I had mentioned once 2 months ago that I loved. He had remembered. Of course he had. We ate at my small kitchen table without talking much. The rain had started sometime in the 20 minutes since he arrived. A proper, heavy rain, the kind that makes the world outside the windows feel very far away. I could hear it against the glass. The kitchen lamp made everything amber and close. Bad day. I asked eventually. Board meeting, he said. 12 hours. He paused. The kind of day that makes you wonder what exactly you're building and why. I looked at him across the table. In the lamplight, with his shoulders just slightly less than their usual precise squared-back posture, he looked younger. More unguarded than I had yet seen him. "Cheol Min," I said. You're allowed to be tired." He looked up at me. Something in his expression shifted, something around the eyes, the slight defensive tension that was so habitual he probably did not even notice it anymore, releasing just a fraction. "You say things like that," he said quietly, "and I don't know what to do with them." "You don't have to do anything with them," I said. "They're just true." We moved to the living room after, and the rain grew heavier. He sat on my sofa and I sat beside him and I put on a playlist of instrumental music, the kind that asks nothing of you, and for a long time we simply existed in the same space, his shoulder warm against mine, the rain conducting its symphony against my windows. And then he turned toward me. And I turned toward him. And there was a moment, one of those moments that exist slightly outside of time, where we were simply looking at each other, close enough that I could see the slight irregularity in his breathing, the precise darkness of his eyes. "Daniel," he said. Just my name. Like it was a complete sentence. "I know," I said. And then he kissed me. It was not the kiss of a man who was impatient. It was the kiss of a man who had been very careful for a very long time and had just, quietly, decided to stop being careful. His hand came up to cradle the side of my face, his palm large and warm against my jaw, and he kissed me slowly, thoroughly, as if he were learning something he intended to know for the rest of his life. I felt the world outside narrow to the exact dimensions of this room, this sofa, the rain, his warmth. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing differently. His forehead came to rest against mine. "I've been wanting to do that," he said low, "for about 10 weeks. "I know," I said again. "I've been counting too." He laughed softly against my lips. And then he kissed me again, and this time there was less careful and more everything else. The hunger that had been living quietly between us for months given finally, at last, permission to speak. He kissed along my jaw, my throat, and I made a sound I had not planned to make, tipping my head back, my fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. His lips were at my collarbone, my pulse point, the sensitive curve below my ear, and I was aware, dimly, warmly, that the rain was growing louder, as if it were keeping a kind of score. He carried me. I want to note that I am a grown man of 28 with opinions about my own autonomy, and I have never, not once in my adult life, allowed anyone to pick me up and carry me anywhere. And yet when Cheol Min slid one arm under my knees and stood, I did not protest. I wrapped my arms around his neck and he carried me to my bedroom as if I weighed nothing, as if this were the most natural thing in the world, and laid me down on my own sheets with a gentleness so deliberate it made something ache in my chest. He looked at me in the dark of my room, the only light the diffused blue-gray of the rainy night through my curtains, and he said very quietly, "Are you sure?" "Cheol Min," I said. I have been sure for 10 weeks. Something broke open in his expression then, not in a painful way. In the way a window breaks open to let in air. He worshipped me. That is the only word for what happened next. He touched me like I was rare. He kissed every part of me, the bend of my elbow, the soft skin below my ribs, the inside of my wrist, with the focused attention of a man for whom this was not a prelude but the thing itself. When his lips traveled the inside of my thigh, I had to press my hand over my mouth to contain the sound that wanted to escape. When he finally took my length slowly, reverently into the warmth of his mouth, I could not contain anything at all. He brought me to the edge and held me there and looked up at me with dark eyes, and I understood, in that moment, that this man loved carefully and completely and with his whole being, and that he always had, and that whatever had gone wrong in his life before had not been him. When he finally pressed himself into me, slow and utterly careful, watching my face the entire time, the sensation was so overwhelming that I pressed my face into the curve of his neck and held on. He found the exact place inside me that made the world go white at the edges, and he stayed there, moved there, his forehead against mine, our breathing tangled together. "Daniel," he said into my hair. "Here?" I said. "I'm here." And when the knot of his bond settled into me, that deep, resonant warmth that Omega physiology has no really adequate words for except home, I closed my eyes and thought, yes, this is exactly what I have been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. Afterward, we lay tangled together in my bed, his arm heavy and warm across my waist, listening to the rain. "I haven't felt like this," he said quietly, "since before I learned to stop expecting it." I turned to look at him. "You're allowed to expect it," I said. "You deserve it, Cheol-min. Whatever happened before, you deserved better." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You always sound so certain about things." "I am certain," I said. "About some things." He pressed his lips to my temple. The rain softened outside. We slept. Over the 5 months that followed, we built something real. Not effortless, I want to be accurate about this. Relationships between omegas and alphas carry particular social pressures that I refused to pretend did not exist. There were people who raised eyebrows at Cheol-min being seen publicly with an omega, who made comments that I won't dignify by repeating. There were moments when his high-pressure professional life collided badly with my own demanding schedule, and we had to learn, sometimes through friction, always through conversation, how to be patient with each other. There were nights when he worked too late and I ate dinner alone and missed him in a way that was almost physical. But there were also mornings. Mornings when I woke to find him sitting in my window seat with a cup of barley tea, reading, looking so completely and naturally at home in my space that my heart did something complicated and warm. There were evenings when he came to sit at the back of my lecture hall and listen to me teach, and afterward told me with genuine awe that watching me work was like watching someone exactly where they were supposed to be. There was the night he fell asleep on my sofa with my cat. Yes, I have a cat, a gray tabby named Sue, sprawled on his chest, and the image was so perfectly, absurdly tender that I took a photograph and kept it. I was happy. We were happy. I knew it in my body the way you know music, not as information but as feeling. And then, 5 months in, I woke up one morning with a nausea that was different from ordinary nausea, and something in my body, that deep instinctive knowledge that supersedes conscious reasoning, told me before I even took the test. I sat on my bathroom floor for a long time after the 2 lines appeared. Not in shock exactly. In the particular stillness of someone receiving news they had not known they were bracing for. I pressed my palm flat against my stomach and breathed. Baby. I was 28 years old, in a 5-month relationship, employed but not wealthy, with a spare bedroom I had been using as an overflow library. This was objectively not optimal planning. And yet, Halmoni, I whispered to the bathroom tiles, not sure why I was addressing my grandmother who was 3 cities away and presumably asleep. "I think I'm going to be a father," I told Cheol-min that evening. We were in his kitchen. He had been cooking, the sleeves pushed up, something fragrant simmering on the stove, and I sat down at his kitchen island and said, "I need to tell you something, and I want you to let me finish before you react." He turned from the stove immediately, wiped his hands on a kitchen towel, and came to stand across the island from me. His face was already intent. "Okay," he said. "I'm pregnant," I said. He didn't move. For approximately 4 full seconds, he stood completely still, and I could not read his expression with any certainty, and my heart was doing something uncooperative behind my ribs. And then his eyes filled. He did not cry, I had not yet seen him cry, and this was not quite that, but his eyes went bright and wet and he pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment, and then he came around the island in 2 strides and pulled me into his arms, and his arms were shaking slightly. "Tell me that's real," he said into my hair. "It's real," I said. He held me tighter. "Tell me again." "Cheol-min." I pulled back enough to look at his face. His cheeks were wet. "We're going to have a baby." He kissed me then, urgent and soft at once, his hands cradling my face. "Marry me," he said against my lips. Not a question exactly. Or perhaps a question and a declaration simultaneously. "Ask me properly," I said. He laughed, this wet, overwhelmed sound, and pressed his forehead to mine. "Daniel Kim," he said, "I love you more than I know how to adequately express. Marry me. Please. Be my family." "Yes," I said. Obviously yes. But even as I said yes, even as we planned and dreamed and told my parents, my mother cried, my father hugged Cheol Min for a very long time and said nothing, which from my father was the highest possible form of approval. Even as the warmth of all of this settled around me, the research I had been doing for months was reaching its conclusions. I had been careful. Methodical. I am a researcher by nature and by training, and I had approached this with the same systematic attention I brought to an academic investigation. Across months of careful conversations, with old acquaintances, with legal public records, with Cheol Min's ex-husbands who, one by one, agreed to speak to me when I reached out privately and explained who I was and what I was trying to understand, the picture had become undeniable. 6 marriages. 6 failures. 6 men who had entered those marriages willing and hopeful and left them, variously, sick, exhausted, heartbroken, defamed, or simply ground down to nothing. Park Cheol Min's mother. Mrs. Park Jin-suk. The first husband, Min-ho, she had fed him something at a family dinner that he was violently allergic to and made it clear afterward, with a cold smile and no warmth at all, that he was to say nothing to her son about it. "Accidents happen," she had said to him. "And you wouldn't want Cheol Min to think you were trying to cause problems in the family, would you?" Min-ho had said nothing. He had also quietly begun sleeping in the guest room and eventually left. The second husband, Jae-wook, she had assigned him a schedule of family obligations and household management that would have broken a professional household manager. Dinners to plan and host, family events to coordinate, elderly relatives to visit, gift-buying lists that ran to pages. All of it with the implicit message that this was what it meant to be part of the Park family. He had worked himself to the edge of physical collapse before a doctor had intervened. The third husband, Sung-hyun, she had told Cheol Min with tears in her eyes and a trembling lip, that Sung-hyun had shoved her. That he had raised his hand to her. Cheol Min, who loved his mother and believed, as a man who had never been given any reason not to, that she would not lie to him about something like this, had been devastated and furious. The marriage had ended in a confrontation that Sung-hyun still recalled with visible grief when he spoke to me. "He looked at me like I was a different person," Sung-hyun had said quietly over tea, his hands wrapped around his cup. "And I couldn't prove it wasn't true. How do you prove the negative of something like that?" She cried so convincingly. I think about it still. The 4th, the 5th, the 6th, each story slightly different in method, consistent in pattern. She found the crack. She applied pressure. She waited. I gathered all of it. I had spoken to each of them in person. I had my notes, their permissions to use what they had told me if it ever came to that, their quiet and exhausted hope that someone was finally paying attention. And then I began to prepare. I'm not a dramatic person. I do not enjoy confrontation for its own sake. But I am also my grandmother's grandchild, and my grandmother taught me something clear and non-negotiable. You do not love your oppressor. You do not make space for the thing that means to harm you. And if someone means harm to your family, to your child, you do not wait and hope. You act. I bought the body camera 2 months before the wedding. A small, discreet device that clipped to the inside of a jacket lapel. I wore it every time I was in her presence. I also had 3 cameras placed in carefully chosen locations in her home. In the sitting room, in the dining room, in the garden terrace. Placed during the one occasion when she had invited me to see the house, and had conveniently left me alone in several rooms, which I believe she intended as an intimidation tactic and which I used for something more productive. She was not an unintelligent woman. But she had never encountered anyone quite like me. I want to be fair. I try always to be fair. Park Jin-suk loved her son. I do not doubt that. In her way, in the only way she seemed to know how, she loved him enormously. She had protected him and shaped him and been the central figure of his life in ways that I came gradually to understand had very little to do with Cheol Min's well-being and everything to do with her own. She wanted to be indispensable. She wanted to be irreplaceable. She wanted, I think, to be the love of his life in a way that precluded anyone else from holding that position. That kind of love is not love. It is possession with a love-shaped label. But I try to be fair. When Cheol Min brought me to meet her, a Sunday lunch 4 months into our relationship before the pregnancy, I had already begun my research. I wore the body camera. I came with a smile that was entirely genuine, because I believe in meeting people honestly even when you are also gathering evidence, and I sat across from her at a dining table set for 3 and felt her look at me. It was not a warm look. It was the look of a woman conducting a rapid and unfavorable assessment, her eyes moving over my face with the cool efficiency of someone calculating a threat level. "You're an Omega," she said, approximately 90 seconds into the lunch. "I am," I said pleasantly. "Cheol Min usually chooses Omegas," she said in the tone of someone reporting a regrettable pattern. "Here I am," I agreed. Cheol Min, to his credit, was watching his mother with an expression I had not quite seen on him before, careful, slightly tense, but present. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. His mother's eyes moved to that gesture and something in her face tightened almost imperceptibly. The lunch was polite and entirely uncomfortable, and I drove home afterward knowing with complete clarity what I was dealing with. It was when I told her about the baby that things became explicit. Cheol Min had told her. She had reacted with a smile that did not reach any part of her face except her mouth, and a week later she called me and asked me to come for tea. Just the two of us. She said she wanted to welcome me properly. I wore the body camera. I checked that the sitting room camera was operational. She poured the tea herself, which I noted. She had dismissed her housekeeper for the afternoon, which I also noted. She was wearing the expression of someone who has made a decision and arrived at peace with it. "You seem like a clever young man," she began. "Thank you," I said. "Then you'll understand," she said, folding her hands in her lap, "that I'm asking you this plainly and with respect for your intelligence. Terminate the pregnancy and end this relationship. I will arrange a financial settlement that will allow you to live very comfortably." I looked at her over my teacup. "No," I said. Something flickered in her eyes. Not surprise, she had expected resistance, but a recalibration. "You don't understand what you're getting into," she said. "Cheol Min has had 6 marriages. They all failed. Have you asked yourself why?" "Yes," I said. "Extensively." Another flicker. She smiled, thin and careful. "He is not easy to love, my son. He is demanding. He is absent. He is, I said, setting down my teacup, "one of the kindest, most thoughtful, most genuinely good people I have ever met in my life. And I think you know that. I think that's actually why you are so afraid of anyone loving him well." Silence. Her expression shifted. The pleasantness drained away and what replaced it was something harder and colder. "I will make your life very difficult," she said quietly but clearly. "You think you know what happened to the others? You have no idea what I'm capable of." "I have some idea," I said. "More than you think." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she seemed to pull herself back, the pleasantness reassembling like a mask being replaced. "We'll see," she said, and poured more tea as if the preceding conversation had not happened. I went home with very good audio footage. The wedding was set for a Saturday in spring. Cherry blossoms, it had seemed right. The night before, Cheol Min and I observed the tradition, which I had half-heartedly agreed to and then, as the actual night arrived, was glad of. He stayed at his apartment. I stayed at mine. We talked on the phone for 2 hours and I could hear in his voice the particular quality of happiness that is almost painful in its intensity, the happiness of someone who does not quite believe that the good thing is actually happening and keeps checking to be sure. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," I confirmed. "Daniel," he said. And then quietly, "Thank you for choosing me." "Cheol Min," I said. "Thank you for being someone worth choosing." I hung up eventually and sat in my window seat and looked at the city and thought about what tomorrow was and what I was carrying, the baby and the evidence and the knowledge of what his mother would do if I did not do it first. She invited me to dinner. That evening. The night before my wedding. I received the invitation in the early afternoon, a text from Cheol Min forwarding his mother's message, his own edition reading. "She says she wants to give you her blessing properly before tomorrow. She seems sincere. Would you be okay going? I can come too if..." I had replied, "I'll go. Don't come. I want to show her that I'm not afraid of her." Cheol Min had replied with a heart and then, "You're the bravest person I know." I went to her house that evening with the body camera active, having spent 20 minutes verifying that all 3 house cameras were still operational. I arrived at 7. She welcomed me with genuine seeming warmth. The housekeeper served dinner. She was charming, soft, reflective. She spoke about Cheol Min's childhood, about her hopes for grandchildren, about being glad I was the one. She poured wine, which I declined because I was pregnant, and water instead. And then she excused herself briefly to check on dessert. I watched her go. I sat very still. When she returned, the plate she set in front of me was slightly different from what had been there before. The soup had been replaced with a small bowl of something fragrant and warm, and she said it was a traditional family recipe she made before every important family occasion. I looked at the soup. I thought about Minho. It smells wonderful, I said. I'll just let it cool a moment. She smiled and sat across from me and talked about wedding flowers. When she looked away, reaching to refill her own water glass, I switched the bowls. Mine for the one she had been eating from. Smoothly, without drama. My hands did not shake. Then I waited. 20 minutes later, I pressed both hands to my stomach, exhaled sharply, and said in a voice of controlled panic, "Something's wrong." She looked up immediately. "The baby?" I said, pressing harder, doubling slightly. "Something, oh." I slid off my chair and onto the floor, and I let my voice carry the full measure of fear I had rehearsed, and I said, "My stomach, the baby, my baby." Her expression. I will not describe it in detail because I think it would take the joy out of what happened next. But I will say, it was not the expression of a woman who was frightened for me. It was the expression of a woman for whom things were going according to plan. She called Cheol Min. He arrived in 11 minutes. I will never forget the sound of him coming through the door, the speed of his footsteps, the barely controlled panic in his voice when he said my name. He dropped to his knees beside me and gathered me up, and his hands were searching my face, and he was saying, "Daniel, Daniel, look at me, I'm here." "I'm okay," I said against his shoulder. "I'm okay. The baby is okay. I need to tell you everything." He went still. "Right now," I said quietly. "I need to tell you everything right now before she gets back from calling the ambulance." He pulled back just enough to look at my face. His eyes were still frightened and now also very, very alert. "The soup," I said. "She switched it when she left the table." I switched it back. "I didn't eat it. She was going to," my voice caught. Not performance, actual emotion, because even now, even having prepared for this, being in this moment with his arms around me was different from theorizing about it. "I have everything recorded. Your mother. All of it. The things she did to the others. The things she said to me. Tonight. All of it." Silence. "Cheol Min," I said and took his hands in mine. "Your marriages did not fail because of you. Not one of them. She destroyed every one from the inside deliberately. I found them. I spoke to all 6 of them. And I have proof. All of it." He looked at me for a long time. I watched his face process something enormous and complex, something that had been awound for years, a wound he had learned to carry as a personal failing, being very slowly, very painfully reconfigured. He stopped. "Yes," I said gently. "Her." He pressed his eyes shut. His jaw worked. He was shaking slightly, not from cold. She came back into the room then, with her phone in hand and a performance of concern on her face that was really quite skilled, and she said, "The ambulance is," and then she saw us. Saw his expression. And she stopped. "Cheol Min," she began. "How long?" he said. His voice was quiet. Quieter than I had ever heard it, which, I had learned, was the direction his voice went when he was at the extreme end of something. "I don't know what." "How long?" he said. "Have you been doing this?" She looked between us. Her face went very still. "He's lying to you." "I have it all," I said from the floor, and I reached into my jacket and unclipped the body camera and set it on the carpet between us. "I have it all, and I have had it for months, and I have not used it until tonight because I wanted to be absolutely certain before I brought it to him. Because I love him and I did not want to be wrong." Her face did something complicated. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something real in it. Something like recognition or grief. But then it closed again. The ambulance arrived. The police arrived shortly after because Cheol Min had made a call I had not heard. When the investigation revealed what was in the soup she had prepared, not lethal in the amount but not nothing either, a substance that in sufficient quantity had documented complications for pregnant omegas, the expression on her face was the expression of someone who has finally, after a long time, arrived at a reckoning. "You are not my mother," Cheol Min said to her, in the corridor of the hospital, in a voice I hoped never to hear from him directed at me. It was the voice of something final. "My mother would have loved the people I love. My mother would have wanted my happiness. Whatever you have been to me, you are not that. You have never been that." She said something. I did not hear it. I was sitting in a hospital room with a doctor who had confirmed, with calm professionalism, that my baby was absolutely fine, and I was holding Cheol Min's hand, and he was sitting beside the hospital bed looking at the wall with eyes that were doing the quiet work of grief. "Cheol Min," I said softly. He turned. "I love you," I said. "We are going to get married tomorrow, and we are going to have a baby. And you are going to be the most extraordinary father because now you know for certain, exactly what it is not." He closed his eyes, pressed his lips together, nodded once tightly. "Okay," he said. "Okay." I held his hand until his breathing steadied. We did not go home that night. We stayed in the hospital until well past midnight, The various administrative and procedural necessities of what had happened required time, and by the time we were cleared to leave, the city was deep in its quiet hours, the streets washed pale by street lamps, the air carrying the faint green cold of a spring night. Cheol Min drove. I sat in the passenger seat and watched the city go past and thought about everything that had led to this moment. Where are we going? I asked when I realized we were not heading toward either of our apartments. The river, he said. I just want to sit by the river for a while. We sat on the bench where we had once talked for 3 hours without noticing the time. The river moved in the dark, catching the occasional gleam of a bridge light. Somewhere distant, a night bird called twice and was quiet. I owe them an apology, he said. The 6 of them. You do, I agreed. And I think they know or will know that the apology is genuine. They spoke to me because they wanted this moment. Not revenge. Just the truth being in the right place. He was quiet for a moment. How did you know? When did you start? About a month after we met, I said honestly. Something in the way you talked about yourself. The way you said the word judgment. It didn't sit right. People who have genuinely poor judgment don't usually have such precise and compassionate insight into everything else. He looked at me. You investigated my entire personal history for my benefit. Yes. While also falling in love with me. Parallel tracks, I said. He shook his head slowly. A sound that was almost a laugh and almost something else. Daniel Kim, he said. What are you? I'm the person your grandmother would have approved of, I said. If you'd had a grandmother like mine. He turned to look at me fully then, and his expression in the dim riverside light was something I will carry in my chest for the rest of my life. Raw and open and exactly the face of a man who has just been fully, completely seen. I think, he said very quietly, I've been waiting for you specifically. I didn't know that's what I was doing. But I think that's what it was. I reached up and touched his face, the geometry of his jaw, the particular warmth of his skin. I know, I said. He turned his face into my palm. Pressed a kiss there. We went back to my apartment eventually. It was nearly 3 in the morning. We had a wedding to be at in approximately 7 hours. We were exhausted and emotionally wrung out, and I was pregnant and he had just watched his mother be arrested, and what we needed was sleep. But we did not sleep right away. We lay together in the dark of my room. The same room where the rain had first made its argument months before, and the intimacy that unfolded between us then was different from the first time. There was nothing uncertain in it. No question being asked. It was instead the intimacy of 2 people who have stood inside the worst possible version of something and emerged on the same side, reaching for each other not out of wanting but out of the bone-deep need to affirm. You are here. I am here. We are here together. He kissed me as if he were putting something down, a long-carried weight, a years-old habit of bracing. His hands in my hair, my hands at his waist, and the slow deliberate tenderness of it made my chest ache in a way that was not painful but simply full. He kissed my collarbone, my shoulder, the curve of my stomach where our child was sleeping, and I ran my fingers through his hair and looked at the ceiling and breathed. When we finally came together, unhurried, reverent, moving with the particular synchrony of 2 people who have learned the exact language of each other's bodies, there were no more secrets between us. No armor. He was wholly himself and I was wholly myself, and the feeling of it, the sensation and the emotion inextricable from each other, built slowly into something that arrived like the resolution of a piece of music you have been listening to for a very long time, not a surprise exactly but a completion. Daniel, he said against my skin. I know, I said. Afterward, I lay with my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. His hand moved slowly through my hair. I'm scared, he admitted, low and honest in the dark. Of what? Of being a father. Of getting it wrong. Cheol Min, I said. You are the man who pulled over on a highway to move a tortoise to safety. You are going to be an embarrassingly wonderful father. Pause. Then a sound against my hair that was partly laugh and partly something more helpless and real. He held me tighter. And I'm going to be right here, I said. At all times. Extensively documenting everything. He laughed then, a full, real laugh, and it resonated in his chest under my ear, and outside my window the city was beginning to suggest the first gray edge of dawn, and we had a wedding to attend, and I closed my eyes. The morning arrived as mornings reliably do, regardless of the events of the night before. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror at 7:15 on my wedding day and examined myself with the impartiality of someone conducting a final quality check. I looked tired, the circles under my eyes were doing their best work, but I also looked, if I was being objective like myself. The white shirt. The pale skin that my mother called porcelain and my students, when they thought I couldn't hear them, called unfair. The pink lips. The hair that I had attempted 3 separate times to tame and which had reached its own independent architectural conclusions, as it always did. My phone rang. My grandmother. "Halmoni," I said. "Tell me you're nervous," she said immediately, in the tone of someone who has been awake since 5 and has strong opinions about emotional honesty. "I'm not nervous," I said. "Liar." I considered. Awake in a particular way. Very awake. Every part of me is very awake. "That's nervous," she said. "Daniel, listen to me." "I'm listening." "You know everything I've ever told you about love?" "Yes, Halmoni." "You found it," she said simply. "The real kind. The equal kind. Your grandfather and I had it for 52 years and I know it when I hear about it and you have found it. So stop being nervous and go get married." My eyes prickled. I pressed my lips together. "Yes, Halmoni." "Good boy," she said. "And tell that husband of yours that if he ever makes my grandson cry, he answers to me personally." "I'll pass that along," I said. She hung up. I stood in my bathroom for another 30 seconds, blinking rapidly, and then I went to get dressed. The ceremony was small. We had planned it that way. My parents, my grandmother, who had made the trip and who stood in the front row in her best blue dress looking like she had been waiting for this moment since I was born, my closest colleagues, a few of Cheol Min's dearest friends and business partners. The cherry blossoms had, cooperative and beautiful, arrived exactly on schedule. The room was flooded with the diluted pink light of a spring morning. I walked in alone. My parents had offered both of them to walk with me, and I had chosen to walk alone because that felt right, because the walking toward was as much about who I was arriving as who I was going to. He was standing at the end of the aisle. Cheol Min in a charcoal suit with a white flower at the lapel, his hair impeccably composed for once, his hands clasped in front of him. He was watching me walk toward him with an expression that was making it genuinely difficult for several people in attendance to maintain their composure, including, I noticed, my father, who had one hand pressed firmly over his mouth. I reached him. He took my hands in both of his. His hands were warm and perfectly steady. "Hi," he said quietly. "Just for me." "Hi," I said back. The officiant spoke. We spoke. The words were the words, the promises, the vows, and I will not recount them verbatim because they were ours. But I will say that when I looked into his eyes and said what I said, I meant every syllable of it with the full weight of my 28 years, my grandmother's teachings, my own long and careful investigation of this man's worth. And when he said his vows, when he said in that low controlled voice with those dark full eyes, "I choose you, Daniel Kim, every morning for the rest of my life I choose you," the control I had maintained with some effort for approximately 30 hours entirely abandoned me and I cried. Completely. Without dignity or apology, the way my grandmother always said genuine emotion should be expressed. He brought his thumb up and caught a tear on my cheekbone and he was smiling. The full smile, the dimple, and then he kissed me and the room made the sound that rooms make when the thing they were gathered for has occurred. My grandmother held my face in her hands afterward, exactly the way she had always done. "Equal?" she asked. "Equal," I said. She nodded once, satisfied, and released me. Then she turned to Cheol Min, who was watching this exchange with the expression of someone in the presence of something they deeply respect, and she said, "Young man." "Yes, ma'am," he said immediately. "My grandson is extraordinary," she said. "He is worth more than you can currently conceive of. You will spend the rest of your life learning exactly how much more." "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I already know it and I expect you are correct that I'll keep learning." She examined him for a long moment. "Good answer," she said and patted his arm. Cheol Min, CEO of Minhwa Group, 6 feet of perfectly composed professional authority, looked approximately 14 years old in that moment and entirely delighted about it. Our son was born in autumn. He arrived on a Tuesday morning, not unlike the Tuesday when I first met his father, which I noted with the private satisfaction of someone who enjoys a good narrative symmetry. He was small and loud and had Cheol Min's jaw, already somehow, and my pink lips, which Cheol Min observed with a tenderness so intense that it was almost hard to look at directly. We named him Seojun. My grandmother held him within an hour of his birth and spoke to him in the low, steady voice she had always used with me, and I watched from the hospital bed and thought, this is how it works. This is how the important things travel, from hand to hand, from voice to voice, from person to person across time. I went back to teaching the following spring semester. Cheol Min had rearranged his schedule in ways that his board of directors found perplexing and his assistant found heroic so that one of us was always home. We had moved, we had to, my apartment, beloved as it was, could not accommodate a marriage and an infant and sue the cat with any dignity, into a house with a garden, on a quiet street, with a kitchen that Cheol Min cooked in every Sunday morning and which smelled, by midday, of the kinds of things that make people feel safe. Cheol Min wrote to each of his ex-husbands personally. Some responded. Some did not. The ones who responded, who met with him, some of those meetings lasted hours. He returned from them looking scoured in the way that honest grief and honest accountability leaves a person. I held him on the nights when that weight was heaviest. That was what I was there for. His mother entered a rehabilitation program and later a facility for assisted living. I have no particular feelings about her that I allow myself to hold for long. What she did was wrong. What she did came from a place of damage and fear. Both of those things are true simultaneously. I protect my family from the second of those truths, and I try, distantly, to have compassion for the first. I still have the photograph on my desk. The one from the morning I defended my thesis, me and my parents and my grandmother at the university gates, laughing at something only we can remember. Beside it now there is a new photograph. Cheol Min is in it, sitting at the kitchen table in our house, Seo Jun asleep on his chest, exactly the way Sue the cat had slept on him once before, in the apartment that feels like another life now, when I had been so moved by the image that I took a photograph. He is looking down at our son with an expression I have no adequate words for, though I have spent my entire professional life working with language. It is the expression of a man who has come home. My grandmother was right, as grandmothers reliably are. Love is a transaction of equals. It is the thing that gives and receives in the same proportion, that holds and is held, that sees and is seen. It is not charity. It is not possession. It does not diminish you to feel it. It does not reduce you to receive it. It finds you exactly as you are and says, yes. Exactly this. I stand up straight. I know my worth. I love with my whole heart and I love myself first, and the man sleeping in our bed with our son pressed against his chest is the proof that those two things are not in conflict. They never were. I am Daniel Kim. I am 28 years old, an Omega, a lecturer, a husband, and a father. I have always known exactly what I was worth. I was simply waiting for someone else to catch up.